Same thing on this one. Negative 9 plus negative 2. They're both negative. I'm adding them together. I get a negative 11. This is just a more complicated version of the same thing, right? So least common denominator of 4 and 3 is a 12. Multiplied by 3, multiplied by 3, multiplied by 4, multiplied by 4. And we get a negative 3 over 12 plus a negative 8 over 12. The signs match, so we simply say negative 3 plus negative 8, put that in parentheses, over 12, which is negative 11 over positive 12. And there you go. Now, the main point I'm trying to make here is the sign, not so much with the fractions and everything. But again, we knew the sign right off the bat. A negative plus a negative is a negative, right? Just like over here, this is a negative. This is a negative. I'm adding them together, so I know whatever the answer is, I know it's a negative, right? So in this case, we're simply going to say, I think that's right. Yeah. So we say negative 26 plus a negative 47 is going to be a negative 73, right? But we knew without actually doing the calculation that a negative plus a negative is a negative. And that's the main point I'm trying to make here, right? Okay, now things get more complicated when you have different signs. When you have different signs and you're adding them together, your answer is going to have the sign of the stronger number, or the number with the higher absolute value. Okay, so basically, if I ignore that sign there, this is a negative 12, but let's say we just ignore the fact that it's a negative 12, which is stronger, a 12 or a 5, which has the higher absolute value, a negative 12 or a 5? Well, the answer is going to be a 12, right? 12 is stronger than a 5. Now, since the 12 is a negative 12, and it's the stronger number, your answer is going to be negative. At this point, you're going to find the difference between a 12 and a 5, which is a 7, and your answer is going to be a negative 7. Now, you don't have to do it that way. If you're fine with your signs, you don't make sign errors, there's no reason for you to change this point. That's fine. That's good. Now, if you're constantly making sign errors, you might want to try something a little different and try to do it the way that I'm showing you instead. Again, so just as long as it works, you're fine. But again, if you're constantly making sign errors, careless sign errors, you can't do that anymore. The math is getting too long, right? Too many steps. So you need to nail it down, and this is an option. Okay, so the next problem we have is a negative 8 plus 12. Well, we have 8 and a 12, right? Well, the 12 is stronger, and the 12 is positive. So we know right off the bat our answer is going to be positive. Now, default is positive if you don't see a sign, so you don't really have to write the positive. But I'm just doing there to illustrate, right? And then you find the difference, right? So 12 minus 8 is 4, so the answer is a positive 4. Okay. Now, how about this one over here? So now we're getting more complicated. We have whole numbers, we have mixed numbers. Well, whole numbers, but we have a mixed number, and we have a proper fraction. So let's say we want to add these together. Now, the question is still valid, and the answer, whatever the answer is going to be, is going to have the sign of the stronger number. Well, negative 1 1/3 is stronger than 5 1/6, and since negative 1 1/3 is negative, you know the answer is negative regardless. And then we just do the steps, right? So first, I'm going to turn the mixed number into an improper fraction. The way you do that is you're going to say 1 times that one right there times the denominator of 3, and then I'm going to stick that numerator back on, so it's plus 1. So what we say is 1 times 3 plus 1 is, well, 1 times 3 is 3, 3 plus 1 is 4, and then you're going to stick it right back over the old one of 4/3. So what you're really saying here is 5/6 plus negative 4/3. Okay, now you can't add or subtract fractions unless you have like fractions, meaning they have the same denominator. And the denominator of 6 and 3 do not match. So I have to multiply this 3 by 2 to turn it into the same thing. Whatever I do to the numerator, I have to do to the denominator. So we keep the 5/6, and then we add negative, well, 4 times 2 is 8. 3 times 2 is 6. There we go. And now they match. Now they both have a 6 as a denominator. Now they're like fractions, so now we can add or subtract the numerators. So we're really saying 5 plus negative 8 over 6. And now we have 5 plus negative 8, which is saying 5 minus 8, which will give you a negative 3 over 6. And we simplify it because both of these are divisible by 3. And that would give me a negative 1 over a positive 2. Next, we find the sum of negative 2 plus 5. 5 is stronger than negative 2. So we know your answer is going to be positive. You don't really have to write that plus there because by default it's positive, but I'm just doing there to illustrate. And the difference between 5 and a 2 is a 3. Right, so 5 minus 3, or so 5 minus 2, sorry, is 3. Okay, so next we're saying positive 6 plus negative 3 is, well, 6 is stronger than a 3, and 6 is positive, so your answer is positive. And 6 plus negative 3 is the same as saying 6 minus 3, which will give you a 3. And then finally, we have a negative 5 plus 1. Well, 5 is stronger than a 1, and the 5 is negative, so your answer is a negative. And the difference between 5 and 1 is a 4. So your answer is a negative 4. Okay, so let's add a little additional level of complexity to this. So let's say we say 12 minus 3. All right, well, I'm not trying to trick you on that. 12 minus 3 is a 9. But what about a 5 minus 7? Now, there's a couple of ways of doing this. Some of you are going to look at that and say 5 minus 7 is negative 2. Excellent, no problem. But if you struggle with that, there's another way of looking at this. This 5 minus 7 is the same as saying plus 5 plus negative 7. In which case you can go back to the rules we just learned, and then you can solve this. So you can say 5 plus negative 7. Well, which is stronger? The positive 5 or the negative 7? Well, the negative 7 is stronger. Then you would say, what's the difference between a 7 and a 5? You would say the difference is a 2. Okay, let's try the next one. Now again, some of you are going to say negative 8 minus 15. That's going to give you a negative 23. That's cool. That's correct. Or you could say negative 8 plus negative 15, in which case you're adding two negatives together. And since you're adding two negatives together, the sign is still going to be a negative. And then you're going to add together the 8 and the 15 and get a 23. Again, if you already know how to do these, don't feel compelled to change the way you do them. I'm just giving you an alternate way of looking at it in case you have problems with signs. The problems you're working on now are going to have so many steps. Some of them are going to have literally over a dozen steps. And if you make a careless sign error, everything else is garbage, right? So you really have to nail down your signs. We don't want to make sign errors, and we don't want to have problems with fractions at this point. You really need to get those things, you really need to nail down those concepts as soon as possible. All right, so we're saying negative 3 minus negative 5. Okay, now some of you know that a negative minus a negative like this is really going to be the same as a positive, right? Well, a giant positive. So negative 3 plus 5, and that would give you a 2. Right? So again, negative 3 minus negative 5, they kind of cancel each other out. You can think of them that way. And you end up with a plus 5. 5 is stronger than negative 3, or 5 is stronger than a 3, and the 5 is positive, so your answer is going to be a positive. Boom. And the difference between a 5 and a 3 is a 2. Let's move on to this one. Again, you're saying 3/8, but you have you're subtracting a negative, which is the same as adding, and that would give you a 5/5, or 4/5, sorry. All right. Now, the denominators do not match in this case, so we need to make sure the denominators match. So what's the least common multiple of an 8 and a 5? Now, if you sort of multiply those together and get a 40, you can totally do that. That does work, right? And in this case, it would actually give you the least common denominator anyways. So what I could do is I can multiply this by 5, and this by 5, and multiply this denominator of 5 by 8, and this one by 8, so that you'd end up with a 40 denominator on both. So 3 times 5 is 15. 8 times 5 is 40, plus 4 times 8 is 32, 5 times 8 is 40, 15 plus 32 is 47 over 40, and 47 and 40, nothing's going to reduce, so this is a good answer. Unless they want the answer in the form of a mixed number, in which case you do have to change it. So if they have an option of improper fraction, bam, this is awesome. Improper fraction simply means the numerator is larger than the denominator, the same or larger. In this case, this is an improper fraction. What you could do is you could write as a mixed number. So you could say 47 divided by 40. 40 goes into 47 once. 47 minus 40 is a 7 with a remainder of 7. And what that would look like is 1 and 7 40th. That's how you turn into a mixed number, right? So the whole number part becomes your whole number, right? That's where I get this whole number right here, right? And the 7, the remainder, becomes your new numerator, and the denominator does not change. So the denominator does not change, right? Okay. So this one is, you're subtracting, so this is a negative 875, and you're adding 241, right? So subtracting a negative is the same as adding. Now, since you have a negative and a positive you're adding together, you are going to pick the stronger number. Now, 875 is stronger than 241, so you know your answer is going to be a negative, and then you're going to find the difference between a 241 and an 875. So let's see, 34 and 6. Okay, cool. So it looks like the difference between an 875 and a 241 is 634. Cool. All right, so let's do multiplication. Multiplication rules for signs are actually really easy in that if the signs match, it's going to be positive. So what I mean by that is, let's say you multiply a positive by a positive, you get a positive. And if you multiply a negative by a negative, you get a positive, right? This is going to get more complicated later on whenever you multiply more than two numbers together. We'll deal with that later. And then the thing is, if they're different, so a positive times a negative is a negative, and order does not matter because of commutative property multiplication. So if you say negative times positive, you also get negative. So, fair enough, right? Okay, so 8 times negative 5 is going to be a negative 40. 7 times negative 8 is going to be a negative 56. So negative 62 times 41 is negative 2,542. Excellent. Let's go down a little bit. Multiplying two negative numbers. Now, negative times a negative is a positive, positive, positive. So we already know what the signs of all of these are going to be. Negative 9 times negative 2 is a positive 18. Negative 2/3 times negative 3/2 is going to be positive, and they're going to cancel out. The 2 here and the 2 here are going to cancel out. Go to 1. 3 here and 3 here are going to cancel out. Give me a 1. And you end up with 1 times 1 over 1 times 1, which gives me a 1. So if everything cancels out, essentially you're going to end up with 1. That's going to be a reoccurring pattern. So if you say a negative times a negative, right, a negative 5 times a negative 125 is going to give me a positive, and 5 times 125 is 625. So we also have that. All right, so quotients. Quotient just means the result of division. So if I say positive 8 divided by a negative 2, the same thing occurs. It doesn't matter whether it's multiplication or division. You can count the number of negatives and find out what the answer sign is going to be. So for instance, a positive divided by a negative is a negative, just like a negative divided by a positive is a negative. And the same thing that was multiplication is a negative divided by a negative is a positive, just like a, of course, everyone already probably knows, a positive divided by a positive is a positive, right? Okay, so positive divided by a negative is a negative 4. Negative 100 divided by 5 is negative 20. Negative 45 divided by negative 9 is going to be a positive, but in this case a positive 5. And it's going to take a few extra steps, but we know a negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive. It doesn't change anything. The fact that we're dealing with fractions, that actually doesn't change anything. So we're going to keep the negative 1/8 multiplied by. Reciprocals still have the original sign. So the reciprocal of negative 4/3 is negative 3/4, not positive 3/4. You just flip the numerator and the denominator. You do not flip the sign. So what you end up with is negative 1/8 multiplied by a negative 3/4, and what that gives you is a positive. 1 times 3 is a 3, and 8 times 4 is a 32. So you end up with a positive 3/32 there.